You know, most of us were taught when we were younger to not play with fire, and then we grew up and we decided to play fantasy football instead, which is a lot like playing with fire on a weekly basis. But then we decided to also add in the tight end position every week, which is exactly like playing with fire, except now we're dousing it in kerosene and we're seeing if we can run away before it blows up in our face. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Listen, playing in a fantasy league, while it's a drain on your mental health, it's still a lot safer than playing with fire. So PSA to all the young people out there, just play fantasy football instead. And of course, you already all know that the tight end position is an absolute mess, but just when it felt like we were turning a corner, it goes right downhill again. We had really good performances from George Kittle and Cole Kmet last week. They disappeared. TJ Hockenson hasn't had a decent performance in like 3 weeks now, and unless you have Travis Kelce, really you're just rolling the dice every single week. But that's why I'm here, to try and help ease you through this process and find the guys that we should be slotting into the tight end position every single week and taking advantage of the good matchups when they present themselves. So let's go ahead and jump into my tight end start and sit video for week 7, and we're going to kick it off on Thursday Night Football. For Jacksonville and New Orleans, it sucks that Brenton Strange scored a touchdown this year before Evan Engram did. But it still doesn't negate the fact that Evan Engram is just one of the safest options at the tight end position, which is really weird to say because he has absolutely no ceiling right now. But the guy is getting 5, 6, 7 targets every single game. The guy's averaging 6 receptions a game. He's giving you the yards. He's really doing everything that you need to not take a zero at the tight end position every single week. And even though this is a tougher matchup going against New Orleans, we don't really know the status of Trevor Lawrence as of this recording. He's practicing with a brace on, and it seems like he will play this week, but just keep an eye on that as if we determine if we want to start Evan Engram or not. Juwan Johnson continues to be sidelined with an injury, and that means Foster Moreau, Jimmy Graham, and even Taysom Hill have been stepping up at the tight end position. But Taysom Hill isn't even playing tight end. Almost all of his snaps last week, outside of a few, came in the slot. So he's playing more of a traditional wide receiver role, and that's where all of his targets came from last year. It's really hard to depict what's going to happen, but because Jacksonville's defense has had a really tough time stopping the pass this year, allowing the second most passing yards in the NFL, it definitely would be worth a shot. And I really can't believe I'm getting ready to say this, to potentially start Taysom Hill this week in the tight end position if you really just don't have anybody else that you can trust. It's a risk. It's a risk anytime that you try to throw him out there. Now, Taysom Hill this past week saw his best receiving performance that we've seen him have over the course of his career. So he did finally earn that tight end status that all these fantasy websites just decided to give to him. But where he lined up, that was not the tight end position, because almost all of his snaps this past week were taken out of the slot, which is something that we're going to want to monitor going forward. Very interesting to see that. And I'm going to put him in yellow this week because Jacksonville does allow the second most passing yards in the NFL this year, and they're bottom third in terms of points allowed to the tight end position. So if you're looking to get a little frisky, then you could go with Taysom Hill this week. But the ceiling you saw last week is his ceiling. That's it. And his floor is way below a majority of the other tight ends that you could play. For as good as Sam Laporta has been this season, he hasn't quite earned that green low-risk label as of yet. That could be coming soon. But after last week and a few dropped passes, we're going to see how this week turns out against a really tough Baltimore defense. Baltimore's defense allows the second fewest passing yards to opposing offenses right now and the fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. If you add together this really tough matchup for Laporta and the fact that maybe his calf is still bothering him a little bit, he is going to be a medium risk play for you this week. Now, I'm going to say it just like I said this past week. Unless you own Travis Kelce or maybe a TJ Hockenson, Sam Laporta is one of the best plays at the tight end position right now. So if you're even consider sitting him for the likes of a George Kittle or a Dallas Goedert or a Jonnu Smith or anything like that, just get that thought out of your mind right now. It doesn't matter how risky Laporta is, he's still in our lineup. Mark Andrews has been exceptional this season. He's finished as a top 12 tight end all but one time this year, and now he gets a Detroit defense that allows the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Now, I will say this, Detroit's defense has been playing spectacular lately, but if there's one area to beat them, it is in the passing game. They can give up some big plays through the air, but they're very beat up in their secondary right now, missing 2 of their starting cornerbacks and Brian Branch, who would probably be tasked with trying to keep up with Mark Andrews this week. Given that this game will also be home for Baltimore, I'm going to go ahead and go with Mark Andrews as a pretty easy start for me this week and probably going to be inside my top 3 tight ends. Hey, Michael Mayer, it is great to see you. Welcome to the NFL. Lovely to have you here after your 5-week absence to begin the season. And yeah, that's technically a joke, but it's also very true as well. I mean, in Las Vegas's Week 6 game, Michael Mayer doubled his production on their first drive from the entire first 5 weeks of the season. And while a Michael Mayer breakout would be great for our fantasy teams because you definitely should be adding him to your roster, it's tough to envision what could happen here in Week 7, given that the guy that supplied him with those targets, Jimmy Garoppolo, probably isn't going to be playing. But the Chicago Bears defense does allow the 8th most fantasy points to the tight end position, and Michael Mayer could slip through the cracks and get you a couple of big plays and be a pretty decent target for whoever the backup quarterback is that starts this week. Unfortunately, Justin Fields and Cole Kmet were not able to get anything going prior to his thumb injury last week. Cole Kmet's going to be on his own now, and we're going to be hoping that Tyson Bagent is going to be able to get him the football more than what Justin Fields has been able to for a majority of the year. After back-to-back weeks with solid performances, Cole Kmet really let us down last week. So this week, he's going to bring another big risk factor. Now, will Bagent look his way more often, needing a guy to just get the ball out to? It's absolutely possible. So would I still start Cole Kmet this week? Yeah, he will still be a start for me. But even though his ceiling is like a top 5 tight end, his floor is like barely inside the top 15. And that's a whole lot of room that you've got to try and figure out where he lands in between. This would be a great 2023 breakout matchup for David Njoku, but it's really hard to trust a guy who hasn't even finished inside the top 12 one time this season. Right now, he's only averaging 4 receptions per game and 32 receiving yards per game and hasn't even been able to find the end zone. Really, at this point, if you're still trying to start David Njoku, you're hoping for like 4 fantasy points from the guy. Once again, this is a really solid matchup, but we don't even know if Deshaun Watson is going to play yet, which is something else that we'll have to keep on monitoring for the rest of the week. Kylen Granson actually had a pretty solid performance last week. Now, a lot of that came after they were already down by 20 points, but fantasy production is fantasy production, especially at the tight end position. But given that they're going up against the #1 defense in the league, the Cleveland Browns, I'm really not going to trust Kylen Granson this week. Now, the one thing that would need for Kylen Granson to break out and be a constant fantasy contributor would be for the other couple of tight ends on the roster to not see as much time on the field. But unfortunately, they still just keep rotating everybody, even though Granson is still the #1 as of right now. For the Buffalo and New England matchup, I'm just not interested in any of these guys. And if you'd like some reasons why, sure, let me go ahead and give them to you right now. We don't know who's going to be starting for New England. Doesn't really matter who's starting for New England. No one can seem to throw the football there right now. Josh Allen's elbow is injured. Dalton Kincaid is injured. Dawson Knox is injured, but still trying to play. Mike Gesicki's barely been utilized at all this season until apparently this past week. Hunter Henry keeps finding himself open, and Mac Jones soars at 10 yards over his head to the opposing defense. I mean, I could keep going on why we don't want to play any of these tight ends. And quite honestly, there's not nearly enough ceiling to get me excited about any of them. And there certainly isn't a safe enough floor to warrant any type of a risk they bring. But I mean, you look at this matchup on paper between Washington and the Giants, and given the fact that both of these defenses are kind of middle of the road in terms of stopping the pass, you would think Logan Thomas and Darren Waller could be decent guys this week to put into our lineup. But Logan Thomas was a decent guy last week, and he had what, like 1 target? And Darren Waller had a decent matchup last week as well, given the circumstances. And he did what? Like absolutely nothing until the fourth quarter. I just don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to explain it, Headliner Nation. The matchup looks good on paper. And if you want to start Logan Thomas and Darren Waller, I mean, you can, but realistically, like ceiling-wise, if they don't score a touchdown, you're looking at like 4 or 5 fantasy points. So really just like every other tight end in the league, you got to hope for a touchdown. Now, the good thing is Logan Thomas has actually scored a touchdown this year. Darren Waller hasn't. I don't know what to tell you all. I mean, you might have to wait for the rankings on this one, but Darren Waller and Logan Thomas, okay floor, sucky upside. More than likely, you'll hate both of them by the end of the weekend. A big congratulations to Kyle Pitts for passing Sam Laporta on the all-time career touchdown list. Yeah, you heard that right. I'm talking about the Sam Laporta that was just drafted this year. Kyle Pitts this past weekend scored his 4th career touchdown. Sam Laporta has 3 this year. They were tied going into last week. And Kyle Pitts just finally scores. Now, he's got back-to-back weeks with pretty decent performances. How long does that last, though? Are you finally on board with trying to start him again? Or is Jonnu Smith going to be the safer bet for tight ends from the Atlanta Falcons? Tampa Bay does a pretty decent job of defending the tight end position. And the guy that I just brought up a minute ago, Sam Laporta, he had a little bit of a difficult time last week. I mean, Devin White, Levante David, both of these guys are very athletic and can drop back in coverage and can give tight ends a fits, even if you get that linebacker matchup with them. So that's one thing to keep an eye on for Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts definitely is going to be risky once again. While Jonnu Smith, while risky, will still have a safer floor than Kyle Pitts because he continues to see more targets. And oh yeah, he also scored last week as well, but he plays more of like a definite tight end position where Kyle Pitts will move out to the slot a little bit more often. So if you wanted me to place my bet on one guy this week, it would be Jonnu Smith again. And as far as Cade Otton goes, Cade Otton has a pretty decent matchup here, but Cade Otton is never utilized and wasn't even utilized last week against Detroit, another team that has a little bit of a tough time defending the tight end position. And if you can't rely on him then, you can't ever rely on him at all. Pat Freiermuth is finally going to find his way back to the field this weekend, which is going to be really good news for those of you that have been holding on to him in your IR spot. Now, it's a great week to return because he's going up against the LA Rams, who allow the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position. So for me personally, when I take a look at Pat Freiermuth this week, will a lot of the volume upside be there? No, it wasn't even there at the beginning of the year, but the red zone looks were, and the touchdown potential was, and that is what we need from the tight end position right now. So Pat Freiermuth in his first game back this week will bring a little bit of risk, but the touchdown potential, it might be better than a lot of the other tight ends in the league. And for as bad as the Pittsburgh defense has been this year, they actually allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. Now, Tyler Higbee was like a ball off the hands away from having a touchdown last week. I mean, hit him right here and bounced away. And if that would have happened last week, would have looked a lot different for him. But with Puka Nacua and then Cooper Kupp getting almost 75% of the targets right now, there just isn't a whole lot left over. Now, maybe we have to look to Tyler Higbee this week to move the ball along because they're just not going to have the run game while they're missing their top 2 running backs. There's a lot to try and figure out with this LA Rams team this weekend. And if Tyler Higbee is actually a good start, if you're definitely looking for a guy that doesn't have a whole lot of ceiling, but brings a decent floor based on just the amount of volume he might get, Tyler Higbee's looking at probably about 4 fantasy points this week, but he doesn't have any type of a ceiling, which is why his risk is super high in this video. Zach Ertz was getting a ton of targets to start the season, but even this past week, he lost out on targets to Trey McBride, who might be trending up at the position for the Arizona Cardinals. But these two teams are in the top 5 fewest fantasy points allowed to the tight end position this year, and they rotate multiple tight ends. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, I just don't see a whole lot of upside, and I really don't see a safe floor for any of the tight ends this week. So for these guys in this matchup, I'm honestly just going to skip it altogether. The Denver Broncos can't stop anybody. They can't stop quarterbacks. They can't stop wide receivers. They can't stop running backs. They can't stop tight ends, and they can't stop the fourth grade bully named Julian, who really just isn't loved enough by his parents and just needs a friend. So this is a great matchup for Luke Musgrave. Unfortunately, he has lost a little bit of a floor because everybody from Green Bay seems to be healthy right now. They're coming out of the bye. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Aaron Jones hopefully is back and feeling 100% this week. And if that happens, the amount of targets that we want for Luke Musgrave may not be there. But just because he doesn't get the amount of targets we would like doesn't mean his upside and his potential won't be there to score a touchdown and put together a couple of big plays for us. Now, neither Adam Troutman or Greg Dulcich made any type of an impact in week 6, and moving forward, I just don't know if either of these guys will. It just seems really weird given the state of this Denver team that they're not trying to utilize a little bit different of a game plan and maybe try to get Greg Dulcich or Adam Troutman going to help take some pressure off the wide receivers. But it's just not happening. And maybe Greg Dulcich at some point does become fantasy viable, but I'm going to have to see it for multiple weeks before I trust it. I had Gerald Everett listed as a medium risk potential start for those of you last week that needed somebody with a little bit of upside at the tight end position. And while he didn't get a ton of volume, he did find the end zone, which was good to see. He had a few targets last week, not a ton of production, but going up against the Kansas City Chiefs in a matchup that probably is going to bring quite a few points, Gerald Everett is not a bad look this week, especially if you're needing somebody that could see 4 to 5 targets and again have some of that red zone upside. And then for Travis Kelce, of course we're starting him. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if your name is not Travis Kelce, you're basically a crapshoot at the tight end position right now. He's played extremely well since coming off of that injury in week 1. It hasn't really hampered him too much considering the fact that he also dealt with twisting an ankle at one point. The guy just continues to go out and he continues to produce. I'll go ahead and just skip over Durham Smythe and we'll just go right to Dallas Goedert because that's probably why you're listening to this part of the segment anyway. Now, Dallas Goedert had a really good game 2 weeks ago and last week took a little bit of a step back, but not bad. It wasn't the worst performance that we've seen from him. But now we're going to find ourselves in a matchup going up against Miami, who will certainly put up a ton of points. And not only that, but they're in the bottom third of most fantasy points allowed to the tight end position this year. So it's a good matchup for Dallas Goedert. AJ Brown will probably feast once again. Maybe we'll even see Devontae Smith get going this week, but Jalen Hurts is going to be looking to have a bounce back performance after that awful loss last week. So 100%. Look for Dallas Goedert to keep going this week. I like his potential, not only because of his upside, but because of hopefully a safe floor as well. San Francisco and Minnesota will bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Gentlemen, it is almost No Shave November, and if you want your beard to glisten and look the way mine does, then you have to head over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners at checkout, and you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. I tell you what, their new line of beard products are absolutely game changers. Make sure you go over and get yours ordered right now. But we got a battle of a couple struggling tight ends right now. To begin the season, TJ Hockenson was on an absolute tear and was seeing tons of targets. But over the last 3 weeks, he's been unable to make it back inside the top 12 tight ends. So can he get it going this week going up against San Francisco? You would really hope so, given the fact that Justin Jefferson is out and somebody needs the football. But Kirk Cousins looked lost last week without Justin Jefferson, and that is not good. TJ Hockenson needs 10 targets. If you can get him 10 targets, then you can keep your offense on the field a lot longer. But I don't know if they're going to do it. And for George Kittle, he had a breakout performance a couple of weeks ago. Breakout for 2023 anyway. And he scored 3 touchdowns, which is exactly what fantasy owners have been waiting on. And then he came just boom. I was going to say crashing back down to earth, but I don't even think that word accurately describes on how poor the performance was. Now, I will say that the Cleveland defense is way tougher than what this Minnesota defense is. And the fact given that Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey could both miss definitely leads me to believe that George Kittle could be in for a pretty decent week. And while I love his upside this week, given the amount of volume that he could see, we also know that he's just disappeared at times with Brock Purdy. And because of that, it's not nearly as exciting to start him as it once was. Headliner Nation, I appreciate you tuning in to my Week 7 tight end start and sit analysis. Every matchup on the slate we just discussed. Now, I will tell you, if you didn't see my underdog pick 'em to play, it's because there aren't a whole lot of them listed as of yet. And I didn't want to just give you one of the 3 that they have currently listed if I didn't like them. So I'm going to hold off and see when I do my rankings video if there's anything else out there that I like a little bit more. But hit that like button for me, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and leave me a comment down below if you've got any questions about the tight ends. Now, if you're asking about start and sit opinions and you don't think this video helped you, then you got to check out my rankings video when we put the guys in order that comes out on Thursdays. But I'll try to answer any maybe trade questions or waiver wire questions that still haven't processed, and then we'll kind of go from there. Headliner Nation, peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.